watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture. Funding for Shalom TV has been provided by the following. And by viewers like you.
Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub. Many of you know that throughout Jewish history, the Jewish community has been adept at creating organizations, institutions, which help lead the Jewish community. It began perhaps with the model of the Sanhedrin, which for generations shaped and created Jewish life and was the center of Jewish life, meeting in the temple and then in essence extending its presence through the Mishnah and the Talmud. And then in more contemporary Jewish life, if we look at Jewish life in Eastern Europe, there were always religious community centers, the Vads. There were centers of communal life where leaders got together and felt a responsibility to help and guide and shape the Jewish present, their Jewish present, and the Jewish future. And then, of course, during World War II, there were Judenrats created, where under Nazi control, the Jewish community tried to maintain a certain degree of autonomy and a certain degree of coordinating Jewish life, even if it ended up in a ghetto. We live now in a slightly different age. There is no central Jewish authority, but there are major institutions of Jewish life which help lead and guide aspects of our world and really shape the Jewish future. And every now and then, we get a chance to sit with an individual, sometimes a man, sometimes a woman in modern Jewish life, who is at the center of an aspect of Jewish community today. And at one point early in Jewish America, perhaps the leading, quote, religious institution was the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, which for a long time was the center of the conservative movement's attempt to build a model of American Jewry that on the one hand was committed to Jewish tradition, on the other hand was committed to modernity. During the same era, there was within the Reform movement exciting institutional developments, the Hebrew Union College, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, and an organization of Reform synagogues, which also shaped a major portion of the American Jewish experience. Over time, the Reform movement has become the most, in many ways, dominant expression of American Judaism today. It is the largest movement, the Reform movement. You'll see sometimes in Jewish newspapers it referred to as a denomination. A denomination is a Christian word. We have movements in Judaism. There's the Orthodox movement, the Conservative movement, Reconstructionist movement, and the Reform movement. And as time progressed, the individual who headed the Reform movement's congregational arm, that institution which represents the synagogues of the Reform movement, became a more and more important voice. If we go back, it was once more Maurice Eisendrath, who, and the individual we're about to speak to, made reference to in his marvelous biennial speech, the fact that there is this extraordinary photograph we're showing you now of Maurice Eisendrath as he walked with the Torah alongside Martin Luther King. And he, along with Abraham Joshua Heschel, really started a revolution of social action within the Jewish community. But Maurice Eisendrath is a great Jewish voice who spoke in the 50s and the 60s and really awakened a social consciousness among American Jewry as a whole out of the Reform movement. And he was followed by one of the great rabbis of the Reform movement, Alex Schindler, who was a dear friend of mine. And you met him many, many times through the work we've done. And Alex Schindler then became the chairman of the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations when Menachem Begin became prime minister. And Alex Schindler was the individual who introduced Menachem Begin, who at the time was vilified as a terrorist from the old pre-48 days. But it was Alex Schindler who opened Menachem Begin and brought him to American Jewry. And Alex did enormous work through the Reform movement to bring non-Jews and to make them comfortable within the synagogue. And Alex Schindler was one of the great Jewish voices of his time. He was replaced by Eric Yaffe after Alex died. And Eric Yaffe, you've met him many times on Shalom TV, has guided the Reform movement and also been perhaps the leading rabbinic voice on the American Jewish scene during his tenure. And he became the president of the Union for Reform Judaism. And Eric spoke out in a liberal way and in a very traditional way, shaping a more traditional Jewish life within the Reform movement. And now Eric has moved on. And lo and behold, there is one of the most exciting, dynamic, lovely rabbis who takes his place, Eric's place, and is now the new president of the URJ. It is an honor for me to present to you and have some time with him, Rabbi Rick Jacobs, who is now the new president. Have you actually been installed?
Technically, I have not been installed yet. However, Eric is on sabbatical, and he said, Rick, you're in charge. Formally, I will be installed in June, but as of January 1st.
You are the acting president
Correct.
now of the URJ.
Correct.
And I just want to say one more thing about you, then we'll talk a little bit about you from your own perspective. Rabbi Rick Jacobs comes from Westchester Reform Synagogue in Scarsdale, New York. If you are in the Reform movement, that synagogue is one of the glorious synagogues within the Reform movement. For a long time, it was led by a rabbi named Jack Stern, who created an incredible heritage of Jewish passion and Jewish neshama at Westchester Reform. And one of his assistants, Rabbi Peter Rubenstein, who was a dear friend of mine, went on to become, again, one of the leading rabbis on the American scene today, and he is at Central Synagogue here in New York. And then Rick Jacobs came to Westchester Reform, and you did some of the most exciting, innovative work within the rabbinic sphere. And it's interesting, Eric was not a practicing rabbi like you were. It's not that he did no congregational work, but he did not have the congregational experience of 20 plus years that you have. And Alex was not really a congregational rabbi, and of course, neither was Maurice. So you are, in essence, in the last 50, 60 years, you were the first rabbi to occupy the position of leadership within the synagogue movement of the Reform movement, who has been a lifelong rabbi and who has been in the trenches. You have seen it, Rick, day after day, the problems confronting Reform Judaism and Jewish life as a whole. So I want to say that as a colleague, I am thrilled that the Reform movement chose you. And I'll say this again at the end of our talk. I wish you only the best. And I am so grateful that you'll share a few moments with us and let the audience get to know you a little better. Thank you for joining us.
Mark, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. The honor is mine.
I want to talk a little bit about your background. I know that you are from the Hebrew Union College here in New York, 1982, and you were a congregational rabbi first in Brooklyn, I believe, and now you've been serving in Westchester and Scarsdale. But I don't know where you were born, and I don't know how you came to be you and who your parents were. Where are you from, Rick?
I was born in New York City. I lived in Westchester County till I was 10, and my parents moved to Southern California to start a furniture business and picked us up and moved us out there.
And who's the us?
The us was, I have an older sister, and it was unknown territory, but they said there's a place called Disneyland. You'll love Southern California.
Did you?
It was a challenging place to grow up. I have to say it was a very, very conservative place, also a place that wasn't filled with Jewish life.
No.
And that's how I got involved through our congregation, Temple Beth Shalom in Santa Ana, California. And I spent summers at Camp Swig in Northern California, one of the Reform Movement's great camps. And it was at Camp Swig that the lights were first turned on.
Roughly how old?
I was, honestly, I was 10 years old.
And already the lights started to go on?
Because it was such a place of passion and social justice. Rabbi Joe Glazer of blessed memory was the regional director. And during his tenure, he brought people like Joan Baez and Cesar Chavez and said to be Jewish is not only to care about the world, but to stand up for Jewish values in the world.
How lucky you were if that's the setting in which you grew up. That's amazing. What are your parents' names?
Howard and Suki Jacobs.
Okay. Did they create a Jewish home for you?
They definitely created a Jewish home, and it was important to them. However, you know, we were also an American family, and we made Shabbat. Friday night was always time for the family to be together.
It was.
If we didn't go to synagogue, we at least had our Shabbat meal together. And, you know, my father grew up in a very traditional household, and it was important to find my path Jewishly. But to be very honest, the thing that really solidified my Jewish identity was spending my junior year of college at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. I walked into Rabbi David Hartman's seminary. He had a seminar on Judah Halevi, Moses Maimonides, and Benedict Spinoza. And in that class, the intellectual rigor of the tradition truly, truly came alive. And I left Rabbi Hartman's class thinking, traditional Judaism, this is what's calling me. I went to live on an Orthodox kibbutz in the north of Israel, Tzedei Eliyahu, and I just looked for the whole wide community that was like David Hartman, who was a Rabbi Soloveitchik Talmid. And what I came to learn is that he was a very singular individual.
Yes.
But he created in me this lifelong love of Jewish learning, and he is my Rav to this day. I spend my summers studying with him. He just celebrated his 80th birthday.
And you are part of the Hartman Institute, are you not?
I am a senior rabbinic fellow of the Hartman Institute, and it's been a constant source of growth and strength and of pluralism in the Jewish world, that we are not just the Reform movement, we're the Jewish people.
It means also that you have a passion for continuing your own Jewish study.
There's no doubt about that. Listen, if you're a pulpit rabbi for almost 30 years, and you know this work, you have to keep, you know, bringing new water to the well. If you're going to share ideas and teachings and sermons with people, you have to nourish that yourself. And honestly, that has been a place I've gone to almost every summer and spent time learning and seeing the big issues, but also finding my way into new intellectual areas and to open something like the Zohar, the mystical work, with some of the first-rate scholars in Jewish life.
It's interesting for me to hear you say that, because one could expect someone who now has a major institutional role, and your role now is to lead the Reform movement. Speak about that one more moment.
For me, pluralism means that I can't ever claim that I have the sole expression of Judaism that's authentic.
Good for you.
It doesn't mean that we do
is
have
Reform Judaism wrong?
Reform Judaism is right.
Okay.
It's authentic.
Is it the only right?
It is, of course, not the only right.
Yes. Is Orthodox Judaism right?
No, it's not the. It is right, but
It
it's
is
not
right.
the only
It's not
right.
And boy, that's the most important thing I think modern Jews have to understand. There's right in every movement and never exclusive right. Do you agree?
I completely agree, and I think it's embedded in the tradition. I don't think it's a personal view, and I don't think it's a modern view. I think it is literally, if you look at the Talmud has such a deep regard for alternative views, that you keep alive alternative views, that you have to study the alternative view, because it may turn out in the course of the ongoing flow of Jewish life that the alternative view may at one time become the dominant view. So how to cultivate that and how to, you know, have a regard and a deep respect for those whose views are authentic but different is embedded, to me, into the basically the way forward for us.
One more question about your own background. You were part of the Avodah dance ensemble, correct?
That is correct.
First of all, you should explain to us what it is and how in the world does that happen, Rick?
Well, dance to me has been a part of my life since I was in college. I love to dance, and I studied, by the way, at the Rubin Academy in Jerusalem. I was given an audition on an El Al flight on literally at 30,000 feet in the air. I was sitting next to a gentleman who I didn't know, and we got to talking. He was a ballet master being flown to the Rubin Academy in Jerusalem to teach for the next 2 months. He said, do you dance? I said, yes, I do. He said, well, let's have a ballet bar in the middle of the El Al flight.
Is this true?
Of course it's true. The flight attendant, move away, move away. He gives me an audition. He says, okay, you have a full scholarship. When you get to Jerusalem, you just come in, you tell him Donald Farnsworth said that you are now a scholarship student. So,
share it.
Well, first of all, my religious awakening and my involvement in serious Jewish study actually coexist. At the same time, I got seriously involved in studying dance. And I studied in Jerusalem at the Reuben Academy, in New York, in Los Angeles. The Avodah Dance Ensemble is a Jewish modern dance company that brings Jewish repertory to universities and congregations and Jewish community centers throughout North America.
So you performed?
Performed, choreographed, and loved that part of my career.
I remember the time when I said to myself, Mark, you're going to become a rabbi. Do you remember that decision?
To me, it was a harder decision. I actually knew I wanted to go to the Hebrew Union College, but I thought I perhaps was on a career to become an academic.
Interesting.
And that my study of the rabbinate would be a necessary and perfect foundation for my ongoing graduate studies.
So at what point do you decide you want to be a pulpit rabbi,
honestly,
congregational rabbi?
It was when I got to work with Rabbi Jack Stern of blessed memory at Westchester Reform Temple. I was his rabbinic intern in my 4th and 5th year.
You were lucky again.
I saw this man's rabbinate, and I said, yes, there are all kinds of challenges to being a pulpit rabbi. This man makes such a difference every day in the life of individuals and the life of this community. I said, I could think of nothing more powerful or meaningful for me to do in my life. And that's when I knew that the congregational rabbinate was what I was called to do.
Good for you, good for you. So you're chosen to become the president. It means you're leaving the pulpit. Were there any, to what extent was that a hard decision for you? I mean, to become the president of the Union for Reform Judaism, it's an enormous honor and it's an enormous opportunity. And all of the creativity you brought to us as Reform and your entire rabbinate, we haven't even touched the ways in which you do other things. It must have been very, very exciting opportunity. You wouldn't have even thought of it. But at the same time, it meant leaving something you loved. Describe for a moment what that tension was like for you.
Well, first of all, I imagined my whole rabbinic career was going to be spent serving this incredible congregation called Westchester Reform Temple. So I wasn't looking. I was so unbelievably fulfilled and challenged where I was. So for me, the idea of leaving was really a kind of a heretical thought. Why would you leave something you love so much? But to be very honest, I left because I wanted to be able to take the things we had learned, the things that we were discovering, and find a way to apply some of those things across not just the New York area, but across North America, where there are things that we were discovering about Jewish life that actually would be of not just interest, but of value. Can I take some of the challenges, some of the opportunities, some of the creativity, some of the frustrations, and could we grow and strengthen the movement at this moment? And honestly, that's what called me forward, not just to leave my congregation, but to do something that could make a difference on an even larger scale. And that was an exciting opportunity. It was hard to leave. I have to say, I love every aspect of my congregational work. I love working with the little kids, getting down on the floor with the nursery school kids, working with B'nai Mitzvah, with high school, college. Through the life cycle, it all was so fulfilling. And yet it feels like at this moment in my life, it's time to take what I've learned and how I've grown and see what's possible, because Jewish life seems to be calling forth for a new way of thinking, a new way of practicing, a new way of leading. And so that really is what calls me forward.
Okay. I want to talk about what you feel the new way should be in a moment. I want to deal with something because it's impossible to avoid it. When you were chosen, there were people who celebrated, and then there was all of a sudden appearing in Jewish newspapers and blogs, wait a minute, who is this man? And he's involved in J Street and New Israel Fund, and Eric Yaffe was always known to be on the left, but Rabbi Jacobs seems to be on the left of Rabbi Yaffe, and where is he? And what is his commitment to Israel, and does he really love Israel? And people didn't know about your history of how you went there and how you studied there, and they didn't know your connection to Hartman. They didn't know about the Avodah Dance Ensemble. They only knew one thing, J Street and New Israel Fund. You've been asked to speak about this again, but I want to impose upon you. I want you to talk a moment about, A, how you feel about Israel, and what do you want to say to the people who are concerned that anybody who is involved with J Street and New Israel Fund is simply too far on the left to represent mainstream Judaism at the moment? Talk to me about your feeling about Israel.
So let's start with my feeling about Israel, which is strong and passionate. Israel is literally in the core of who I am as a human being, as a rabbi. My family, we have spent years living in Israel. We have a small home in Jerusalem. It's not some place that I visit or some issue I read about in the newspaper. It has been a fundamental part of my rabbinate. It has been, it is, and it will be. So for me, I'm an activist. I'm a person who stands up for Israel in so many dramatic ways. If only we lived in a world where that's the dominant way, that all of us would stand up for Israel with strength, by the way, with a respect for pluralism. I don't have a sense that there's one way to stand up for Israel. I think we in the Jewish community have lost a little bit of that sense that there are many ways to stand up for Israel, to stand up for a vision of Israel as a pluralistic society, as a democratic country, as a country that is the center of Jewish life, for the creativity of the Jewish people. So for me, that's the core of my love for Israel. And my goal as the president of the Reform movement, the Union for Reform Judaism, is to figure out how do we bring more people to a deep engagement with Israel, and however they want to express that. We want to bring more of our young people to Israel with Birthright, with our Nifty programs, beyond college. When I was a congregational rabbi, I brought literally hundreds of people to Israel to see the fullness of Israel. We would go and spend time with Shlomo Riskin in Efrat. We would spend time with secular people exploring their Jewish identity in Tel Aviv. So for me, that's the Israel that I love. So if people come to me and they have one narrow, very limited, and very, frankly, skewed view of who I am, I say, sit down for a minute. Let's talk. Let's sit down probably in Cafe Aroma on Emek Rephaim or somewhere else in the city. But let's talk about how we can strengthen the connection of North American Jewry to Israel. That is an everyday goal. That's an everyday practice. And that's something I work with people across wherever you are in the spectrum. However you define your love for Israel, however you stand up for Israel, we can stand together and we can stand tall and strong. And that's the kind of leadership I hope to bring every day to this movement.
And anybody who has really read about your history understands how profound your connection personally and as a father and as a husband has been to Israel. So now here are the questions that would be asked of you. J Street puts your name on their website as being part of the rabbinic cabinet of J Street. Are you?
I am no longer, and I will tell you that I signed one letter, very important letter. By the way, if you actually take that letter out, I believe that anyone who loves Israel could sign the letter that I signed, because I felt it was valuable for people across the spectrum to have a deep conversation. I don't have a long history with J Street. I have a long history with Israel. I have a deep history. So I'm not a leader, never was, and I'm not now a leader of J Street. I think it's good for the Jewish community for there to be a J Street. I think it's good for Rabbi Eric Yaffe, who went to the first J Street convention and called them out.
You remember what happened when he went there?
I did. There were several people who booed.
Yes.
Several people. But Eric, being a person of conscience, spoke the truth. At the second conference, Rabbi David Saperstein gave a keynote, and he called J Street out and said, there's a deeper, more important thing for us to work together on. And honestly, so you have people who have a deep love for Israel who also understood that talking to people is not, it's not actually to grant every view as, the same. But I don't see the danger in talking and being part of a very pluralistic Jewish community where there are different views, different legitimate views about how we support Israel. So I would just say that, there's a thought that there's one way to color me. But if you look at all my public statements about Israel, I'm a person actually who calls them as I see them. And in terms of my commitment to Israel is very much within the mainstream of our movement. And I stand on the shoulders of Rabbi Eric Yaffe, who is a Zionist in every fiber of his being. And honestly, you shared Alexander Schindler, what he did when Menachem Begin became prime minister. Extraordinary moment. That's the kind of leadership that I hope to bring, that beyond whatever superficial differences we see, there's something much deeper that unites us.
What's your view of AIPAC?
AIPAC is a great and important institution for the Jewish people, for the state of Israel. God bless AIPAC. How can you not feel that? And the answer to what challenges Israel is obviously many different responses. AIPAC is critical to stand up in the U.S. Congress, in our country, and to make sure that Israel is both thought of and supported militarily in terms of the political clout. And you see what's happened in the United Nations this fall with the unilateral declaration of statehood. A critical moment for us to, as a Jewish community, to speak up and to make sure Israel is supported. So AIPAC is critical to the Jewish future and to the well-being of the state of Israel. That to me feels like something obvious, and is clearly supported by the great majority of North American Jews.
The criticism of J Street, and by the way, many people feel that the big tent should include J Street, but that even if there is a big tent, the criticism is that J Street's apparent goal is to pressure the United States government to bring pressure on the State of Israel's government and to push the Israeli government in certain directions. And within American Jewry, there are many who feel that the government of Israel is elected by the Israeli people, and that American Jews have a right to dialogue with Israel, but that American Jews should not have an organization that is trying to pressure an American administration to pressure Israel. Where do you stand on this?
Well, there are many different groups here in North America that exert their view of, kind of the ideal Israel and bring that to public policy. I think our role is to support Israel, but is our role not to speak up for pluralism? For example, the rights...
Yes, so that's not through the American government, American administration.
I'm just bringing up the principle that we can actually have views that strengthen a part of Israel that is challenged.
But that's not the argument.
Well, let me just say, first of all, that one can have certain supportive feelings about an organization without agreeing with the great majority of them. And I have taken issue with J Street in some fundamental areas since it was created.
For example?
Well, all the ones I would say in terms of the Goldstone report.
Yes.
I think that was an example not just of missing the point, but actually strengthening the opposite of what we should have been doing. Goldstone was deeply detrimental to the well-being of the state of Israel. And there was no need, there was nothing right about trying to defend or to come up with some. And I, by the way, publicly to our movement, I spoke about that. It was actually shared with the entire movement. This is long before I was a candidate to become president. So for me, you speak the truth as you see it wherever it is and wherever that moves you in the political spectrum. So for me, I'm not going to sit here with you and have a long conversation to justify potential or actual views of J Street. My views are my views, and they don't, they don't fit into any organizational box. And we as a movement have actually been very clear in terms of our public statements, in terms of resolutions. And Rabbi Yaffe led us, Rabbi Schindler led us. I stand on those same core foundation commitments of our movement, and frankly, that's the key. And I'm not going to defend any one expression outside of our movement, because frankly, at this moment, obviously there's a lot of good public discussion and debate. That's a good thing for us. And by the way, it's good for the Jewish community to have a conversation about Israel, which I think we have literally become fearful of having in a congregation such as my own.
What do you mean?
I'm going to tell you that in my congregation, I have people on the far right and the far left. So the easiest way in a congregation, I would say in the American Jewish community, is to say, you know what? It's such a difficult, contentious thing. Let's not talk about it. If that is the takeaway, that's the worst possible takeaway. So we would facilitate conversations where we would speak respectfully about how we love Israel, what we do to strengthen Israel, and that we would find ways to actually be able to admire and learn from ways that are not necessarily our own, but to see that it's a much bigger field than we've allowed in the present Jewish discourse. So I'd like to open that conversation. I'm not fearful of conversation. I'm not fearful of taking on the tough issues. And in so doing, we will actually strengthen the commitment that people have to the state of Israel, and will understand better the challenges that Israel faces in the present and going forward, and there are real challenges. You don't have to be a genius to see them.
Right. I understand now your position on J Street. It looked to me as I prepared for this meeting with you that you were more involved with New Israel Fund than you were with J Street. And the people who were upset with New Israel Fund feel that the New Israel Fund, while doing many things that are wonderful for Israeli-Palestinian relationships and caring for the fact that the Palestinian or the Arab living in Israel needs to be treated with as many social, civil, and political rights as any other citizen of the State of Israel. The concern is that there's a feeling that the New Israel Fund makes Israel the bad guy in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. What is your sense of the claim among some in the Jewish left that Israel is the problem to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Israel is not the problem. The situation is problematic. Israel's living in an impossible neighborhood, obviously facing challenges all around, wherever we look. And in this young country, to think about Israel as literally as a brand new country in the life of the world, it's extraordinary. There are challenges, and there are real things that Israelis would say every day we want to strengthen. Now, first of all, let me just say that for 10 years, I was the chair of the pluralism grants of the New Israel Fund.
Say that again.
The pluralism grants. That means that we were giving grants, small grants, to modern Orthodox organizations, Reform, secular groups that were trying to work to create the kind of society that is based on tzedek, it's based on real justice. That was the direct work that I was doing every single day, and it was a privilege to do that work. I'm involved in many organizations and many communities. I'm used to being actually involved and being able to also be a person who challenges and asks deep questions. So Israel is not the problem. Israel is a remarkable and inspiring country. Is it imperfect? Yes. Is the United States of America imperfect? Of course it is. And if I have a difference of opinion about how some policies are actually administered or how they're conceived, doesn't mean that I question the very foundation of the Jewish state. So I think the New Israel Fund has been a force for good. I know it to be. Do I disagree with some of the grants that have been made? Of course I do. Do I disagree? That's what being in the leadership is. So I've been, for the 1990s, I was involved in the International Board. The last 10 years prior to coming into this position, I chaired the pluralism grants. And in that, there's a robust conversation about how we live on the Jewish values that are important to us. That, to me, is the bedrock. So for the Jewish state to live up to the ideals of Amos and Hosea and Micah, that's the call. It's not the call of a modern organization. It's the call of the things that we know to be true. And by the way, the aspirations of the Israeli people is to live that out every single day and to strengthen those parts of our society in Israel that can live up to that prophetic mantle. So for me, Israel is the extraordinary modern place of Jewish life. And I would support Israel even when I would disagree with public policy, or even if the particular leader was not my choice. My love for Israel is not about, if my team is in, or if my political party is dominant. My love is at a much more deep level. And by the way, when you have that kind of love, you work for the betterment and the well-being in a very concrete way. And that's the gift that I've been given to be involved all these years.
You say it beautifully, and I wish every Jew understood it as you did, and I'm very proud of you, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
As you look, by the way, at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, are you in any way optimistic at the moment that there can be some kind of peaceful resolution?
I think there has to be. It's an impossible situation, but that's not an unfamiliar situation for us to be in as Jews. So as I look at the status quo and I look at the worst possible scenarios unfolding, it can't be. It seems to me that we have enormous political hurdles to get over, but I also see the well-being of the Palestinian people, the Jewish people, and the neighbors. I have to believe on some fundamental level it is in everyone's interest to create the kind of societies being able to live together in that very, very contentious part of the globe, So I can't actually countenance a world where peace is not possible. I can't give up on doing something that will concretely bring us closer to that. But I'm not naive. I know that there are real hurdles. I know we face here in the United States real hurdles in terms of what will be the role of the United States government, what will be the role of the international community. But for me, I simply can't imagine the status quo as literally the future of the region. There has to be a way for us to find a way to share that part of the world, to strengthen the Jewish people and the Jewish character of the state of Israel, as well as our ability to tolerate and to live and respect minorities. Those are the fundamentals of this country. They are the fundamentals to me of the Jewish tradition. And as well, I also know that Israel is unfairly attacked by people all over the world who know very little about Israel, care very little about Israel. And I'm somebody who's willing and ready to stand up and to take people on and to speak about what I love about Israel, even if they're spewing out all kinds of, and the delegitimization of Israel around the world is a challenge to anyone who cares for the Jewish state as I do. So, it doesn't mean that you focus in on all the challenges. Sometimes you have to focus in on what's great about Israel, which is something people rarely do. But when we do that, we also put the challenges there and say we can do better. And for the children, the grandchildren of all my closest friends whose kids are still in the Army right now, and they say, you know what, will there be a chance that my grandchildren will not have to serve in such difficult military roles in the future? I have to not only believe it's possible, I have to figure out, along with, more importantly, those who live in Israel, how are we going to shape that better future? Because the present is truly, truly so burdensome and so painful for everyone that it can't be the best that we have. We can do better.
I read that while you are against the BDS movement, any attempt to delegitimize Israel through boycotts or the divestment or sanctions, that you do favor boycotting, or you're considering supporting boycotting products made on the West Bank. To what extent, when I read that, is that true?
Well, everything that's written is not true.
That should be a mantra. Every Jew gets up in the morning and says
everything that's said on television
is not true.
Not true.
Right.
So I'll tell you that I stand with our movement that says that boycotting Israel right now is so much a part of the delegitimization of the Jewish state. So it seems to me that what we have now is try to figure out how do we actually find ways to strengthen Israel's economy. So I know for me, when I go to buy wine for Shabbat or for Seder, I only buy Israeli wine. My friends, I show up for dinner at their house. They say, another bottle of Israeli wine? Why are you doing that? Because this is my country. And of course I would want to support. So to find ways that we can support Israel's economy. During the Second Intifada, it was truly a key mission in North America to find ways to economically strengthen Israel. So to me, that's really the discussion. And as a movement, we actually don't have a policy. We have a policy against BDS, and we have a long-standing commitment to try and strengthen Israel in terms of our economic decisions. But to be very honest, this is not a major consideration. It's not something actually that we have a policy on, and it's not one that I personally have a policy on.
So what you're saying to me is you have no intention at the moment of making a statement that Jews should boycott products made on the West Bank?
I do not. You should know that John Risquet, who's the head of UJ Federation here in New York, wrote a piece last February in the Jewish Week where he said part of the big tent is that we could separate, he said, between boycotting Israel and making decisions about certain purchases that we make. And he'd say these are very different things. John was attacked by many people for that stance. I think right now that's not even a discussion that's worth having in the Jewish world. And it's not one that I'm leading or wanting to encourage.
So now I want to switch the perspective in the little time we have left. And I want to talk about some of the things you said at the biennial, which was in some way, although again you will be formally inducted as president later on, that was in some way your coming out party. And you did a marvelous job.
Thank you.
You said, and I'm listening to your speech, and you said a couple of things that I thought were so interesting. What is it about the Reform movement today that concerns Rick Jacobs?
I think we've been living in an old paradigm. I think we have to see that there's a new paradigm. When Eric Yaffe became president of our movement in the mid-90s, it was a different Jewish world. And thank God for the changes, the innovation, the vision that he brought to Jewish life, and that Alex Schindler in his day brought. It's a new day.
How so?
And I think we look at the demographics. You know, in the post-World War II North American Jewish scene, it was assumed that people would eventually join synagogues. You know, you did it for Hebrew school, you did it for a bar bat mitzvah, but you did it. We're living in a world where that's not an assumption we can make. And that some of the demographic studies of who 20s and 30s are, and who some of the people who previously belonged to synagogues are, that we have to think of the synagogue in more creative and dynamic ways. And we have to think of the walls of the synagogue as not being the limit of our own responsibility and creativity in Jewish life. I mean, as a pulpit rabbi, what would you do? You would actually have a barbecue in August. You say, oh, we need some new members. So let's be nice. We'll put an ad in the local paper and new members will show up. But to be honest, what happened to the people who left this year, whose kids became bar bat mitzvah? One of the things that we have been paying attention to are the facts. And the facts are that a great majority of our young people are gone from Jewish life after their bar bat mitzvah, before they graduate from high school. They're gone. The question is, do you want to just say, I hope it gets better, or do you want to actually think creatively and say, how do we engage not just those kids, those families? How do we think about Jewish life as a place where it will matter that I'm involved, that I'll miss something that will be essential to my own sense of well-being, my own purpose in the world, if I'm not a part of that? And by the way, synagogues, yours probably is the exception, I'm sure, but every other one, including the one I led for 20 years and the one I led for 9 years before that, are in need of rethinking how we do synagogue. Because honestly, synagogues are not the most engaging places as a general rule, and we get stuck in the status quo. And frankly, some of what we do were very effective in 1950 and 60 and maybe 1970. But we have to think, what is Jewish education today? What is Hebrew school? What is informal education? What does it mean to go to Israel? What does it mean to take on Jewish identity? What does it mean to be part of a larger collective than just my synagogue or even my neighborhood or my movement? So I think this is a moment where if we pay attention, the world is changing quickly. The synagogue movement has to change as well to capitalize on the opportunity. And I think we are the big tent, but we don't always act as if we are. Synagogues, by and large, are very stressed. The economic challenges of the last few years are enormously challenging. I'm not for 1 minute minimizing that. As a pulpit rabbi, I understood there's a bottom line you have to worry about. You have to worry about, putting the heat on in the middle of the winter. But you also have to think about the big picture. What is it that we're trying to build in Jewish life? How are we going to strengthen Jewish life as opposed to have it somehow unravel? That's not an option that I would contemplate. So I think of the vast number of the uninspired, the unaffiliated. Those are not people we give up on and say, too bad. Those are people actually, I think, who in many ways are looking for a spiritual home, are looking for a spiritual dimension. Many of them will use different language, but joining a synagogue, writing a giant check, making a formal commitment, not until I know that it's really, really critical to who I am. So I think those are the ways that Jewish life has changed. And by the way, God bless all the different areas of Jewish life. The whole playing field needs to be strengthened. But we're going to do our level best to make sure that we're positioned to be the big tent, to open those tent flaps, and to bring in the people who have not found their spiritual home and make their home with us.
At the biennial, you said you asked people there to come up with some of the things they think are the barriers, which was the word you used. What barriers keep Jews out of the synagogue? And so if you had to answer that question instead of the people attending the biennial, what are 2 or 3 of the barriers from your perspective that keep Jews from joining synagogues?
I think some of the key barriers, and by the way, I didn't need to say it because I knew that they're on people's tongue. They'll say that that the synagogue is not the place that's so alive and dynamic. They'll say the high cost of Jewish life. I hear that over and over again.
So you think money is one of the barriers?
I think it's one, but when something matters greatly, you find a way. And I think for the majority of our people, they have not found that that sort of core. So you say, you have to join because you should. Well, I don't know about you, but that doesn't work anymore.
Never.
Maybe it never did work, but it doesn't work now. So I think the biggest barriers are lethargy, boredom, expense, and I think those are all things that we can address. And I think if you just take, and I said in my biennial talk, Chabad already knows that you don't begin with formal commitment and checks. You begin with relationship. You begin by bringing somebody into a core Jewish experience. That's what works in my experience as well. Bring someone to a Shabbat table. Let them taste the joy and the spiritual power of Jewish life. That's likely to bring someone closer. Not, would you fill out a 16-page form? Would you write us a giant check? I think you start by connecting. And by the way, with the young 20s and 30s, go where they are. So one of the things we're going to do in this new iteration, we're going to try and strengthen and really make synagogues the dynamic, compelling places that I think all synagogue leaders want them to be, but to give them the tools. And I know it can be done because I did it in my own congregation. And we're not geniuses, and we're not the only congregation, but there are ways that you can actually raise up and bring new practice into synagogue life. We're also going to focus on the next generation because honestly, if we can't engage our youth, and by the way, our youth start with, early childhood center and elementary through up to bar and bat mitzvah, beyond high school, college, 20s and 30s. That's all part of a continuum. And then we're also going to focus on trying to strengthen literally our connection to Jewish life, to the state of Israel, to the Jewish people, and not just have this narrow thing that we get. One of our kids came back from college, said, Rabbi, I didn't go to Hillel. I said, why didn't you go to Hillel on the high holidays? Well, it's not like here. I said, well, it's not supposed to be like here. It's supposed to be a much different experience. You're supposed to be with more traditional and less traditional people from all over. And the songs won't be all the songs that you know and the melodies, but that's part of being a part of Jewish life. So those are the things that we're going to be busy with every day. And I think they will matter not just for our movement. You're correct to say we're not a denomination, that's a Christian term, but our movement. And we'll do that by strengthening all these areas.
There's so much I want to say in response to what you just said. First, I believe so much of what you say you want to do, you've been doing already at Westchester Reform. And if I want to not correct anything you've said, if I want to modulate what you've said, I want you to know that what you're saying, which is said better than I've heard it most of the time, but the content of what you're saying has been said for 60 years. This is not new. The problem of kids leaving after bar mitzvah, they become bar mitzvah, they're out the door. The adults who come to your synagogue would say the same thing to you. So many of them left the minute their bar mitzvah was over. That's not a new problem. There has never been a majority of Jews, never has been a majority of Jews, ever since World War II, who've affiliated. There has always been a larger non-affiliated population than affiliated. The difference is the non-affiliation seems to be growing. And that's something you're putting your finger on. But these are problems which have existed perennially in an open, modern, American Jewish world.
But I would differ in this alone. I don't know if you saw a movie called Avalon.
The
movie Avalon cataloged the differences in the Jewish communities,
Yes.
and maybe the community that you grew up in or that I grew up in were different, and they were more, kind of enclaves of Jewish life, where the local Jewish bakery reminded you it was Purim time.
Yes, you're right.
And you had this rhythm of Jewish life.
But how long has that been gone?
That's been gone, but honestly, even the idea of living in sort of the great Northeast, we're literally an American movement. We're a North American movement because we include Canada. And I think you're correct to say that Alex, if he were sitting here, God bless him, he would probably give me great advice. He gave me great advice while he was alive, and Eric as well. But I would say that, the strategies have been different.
It's not enough to hear somebody who is eloquent and inspiring. That you are. But I want also to know what the substance behind it is. And it may be that this is the very beginning of the process for you, and you are trying to bring as many ideas into your world as possible, or you may have some ideas. I want to know, the question that the audience has a right to say to you is, it's wonderful that that's your goal. The real question is how? 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 And I'll say one more thing and then you talk. You and I have experienced New York Jewry. We know that there are synagogues in the greater metropolitan area that are doing a spectacular job. And if you go to the conservative, it's part of the conservative movement in general, but it's almost an anachronism in and of itself. You go to B'nai Jeshurun on 87th, 88th Street, and what they do on Shabbat is wonderful. And they create a certain kind of mood that brings young people in, older people in. There's music. They use music in an extraordinary way, which is now being used much more within many movements of Judaism. You go to many conservative Reform synagogues, the music is just glorious, as opposed to a time when I was a child, if there was an organ, there's a question as to whether it was Christian or not. And to have any instruments at all for a period of time was problematic in non-Orthodox Judaism, and then slowly more and more music has been brought in. But my point is there are wonderful, wonderful things happening in synagogues. But what you're talking about is changing what you consider to be the failure of not only Reform Judaism in particular, but modern non-Orthodox Judaism in general. And I want to know if there are things in your mind which you already hope for, that you hope it'll take you time, but that you have a vision of what you want to implement that would bring some of what your goals are to fruition.
So first of all, this is the 9th day officially of my tenure as the president of our union. Right. So I appreciate the question. I will give you an answer for today. I hope that you'll invite me back in not only a couple of months, but a couple of years also to sort of track the effect of
Very
this.
fair.
Because we're going to be very, very disciplined about how we go about transforming Jewish life and synagogue life. We know a lot about how to formulate Jewish identity. We know that things like youth groups and trips to Israel and summer camps shape Jewish identity, but we would then do Hebrew school as if we didn't know all those things. But I'm clear that actually we can create lifelong Jewish learning in a synagogue and not drive people away, but actually attract people, that we can raise the bar in Jewish life. And again, my challenge will be at the end of my tenure to say, how did we move Jewish life forward? How did we strengthen congregations? Because I believe that the synagogue is still the core institution of Jewish life. I believe that to the very marrow of my being. But we have to actually start to learn what we've practiced with experiment and congregational education to change learning to lifelong learning. Synagogue 2000 and 3000 to rethink spiritual practice and prayer and spirituality and music that engages the soul. So, and to create sacred community and to make tikkun olam not just something we do occasionally when we have a little extra time, but a core part of what we do. When our synagogues live in those fundamental areas and create a sense of welcome and to nourish with chesed, with real loving kindness, the pains and the challenges of life, we're going to create something that's so compelling because it exists. I'm not talking about something that doesn't exist. We can travel to places, not just large synagogues, but some of the small synagogues in remote areas are the most vital and alive. But we're going to not just focus on 10 or 20 synagogues, but we have almost 900 synagogues. And that is a huge opportunity. And all those who are outside to figure out how we can bring Jewish life to them and to build bridges. Those are challenges, by the way. I don't care if you're Orthodox, conservative, Reconstructionists, those are the same opportunities. And we're going to work hand in hand with all of the institutions of Jewish life, wherever they find themselves, to strengthen what we're about.
Has Reform Judaism failed?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. To me, there are two kinds of Judaism. There's serious Judaism and not serious Judaism. And by the way, there are a ton of Reform Jews that are as serious as anyone in Jewish life, and there are synagogues that are so unbelievably vital. We have not failed. And by the way, we've taken on challenges that others didn't want to take on, and we embrace that. And we carry Rabbi Eisendrath's Torah that you referenced and shared that image of. We carry that Torah still. We carry Alex's Torah to people who didn't get a chance to touch the Torah. And Eric's Torah, which says open it and study it with depth and long commitment. So honestly, we haven't failed at all. We are not just the largest movement in Jewish life. I believe that we have a vitality and we have a vision that is going to lead us forward, that's going to draw others to us. But we're not just going to become larger. I want us to become deeper. I want us to strengthen what we do, because again, numbers can tell a very false story. And we want the core of what we do to reflect real substance. And that's what I'm about as well. And I think that's why I was chosen. They wanted someone who knew synagogue life, both its challenges and its opportunities. And they wanted somebody who would bring that reality, but not be limited to one place. Find the way to strengthen other congregations. And methodology, it's not a simple thing to figure out how do you go in. Is it just the rabbi? If you have a strong rabbi, will everything fall into place? I actually don't think it's as simple as that. But I'm not going to be simplistic and say it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and all of a sudden everything falls into place. We're going to be nimble. We're going to be clear. We're also going to be very, very honest about what we can do well and how we can make a difference in Jewish life. We can't do everything in Jewish life. But what we do, we're going to do not just with passion, but with a real effectiveness. And we're going to grow and deepen Jewish life with everyday efforts. And then I hope that you'll invite me back and you'll say, Rick, my goodness, it wasn't just rhetoric. Look at what is going on. And I'll be honest with you then, because we're going to make mistakes. We're going to experiment in ways that will not always be successes. That's what an experiment is. Sometimes you fail, sometimes you succeed. But you say that this is not as good as it gets. We have got to do better for your children and grandchildren, for my children and grandchildren. And I want to just make it more than just the luck of the draw that you end up at a certain place or a certain camp, or you had a certain trip leader to Israel and that changed everything. We've got to raise up the whole kind of landscape of Jewish life, and to think of the institutions as being places that can shape Jewish identity. And honestly, I think there are literally opportunities everywhere we look. There are challenges wherever we look. But my orientation is to see what's possible and to bring people step by step to figure out what is the path, what is the methodology, not just to hope and pray, which we do, but that's not enough. So when you invite me back, I hope you'll be honest. I'll be honest too. I'm sure some things will be going very well, other things we're going to work on. I think, but we're setting our challenge and our sights on what is really key, and that's an exciting place to be, and I look forward to helping to shape that movement, to learn from colleagues like yourself and others, and together to make that difference that generations to come are counting on us to make.
I was so much looking forward to meeting you, but this exceeds anything I ever imagined. The Reform movement has been extraordinarily wise in its decision to invite you now to be the leader of the URJ for a period of time. I hope it's for many, 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 many years. And I mean this seriously. It's not just the Reform movement that's lucky to have you. American Jewish life is going to benefit from you. You are articulate, you have vision, and you're one of the loveliest rabbis to grace the pulpit. It's been an honor to have you on Shalom TV, and I'm going to chase you all the time. You're going to have to come on all the time. Sometime to do sort of a, how's the Reform movement doing? But I also want you to let me come and talk to you about the issues that are the most serious issues on the American Jewish scene. You are not simply an institutional voice. You are a profound rabbinic voice on the American Jewish scene, and I hope you will always find the time somehow in what I know is an unbelievably busy schedule to let me just sneak in for 5-10 minutes sometime, just to let you comment on what we see going on in the Jewish world.
It will be my pleasure.
This has been wonderful. Thank you very, very much.
My pleasure.
And that was my meeting with Rabbi Rick Jacobs, the new president of the URJ, the Union for Reform Judaism. I hope you enjoyed meeting him. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments to the ideas expressed by Rabbi Jacobs. Please write me or email me or post on our Facebook wall or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who can send a tax-deductible contribution of $36 or more to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media to help support our programming. Tax-deductible checks may be made out to GEM and mailed to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. Please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD, and we thank you for your kind support.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.